Hello, good day everyone. My name is Joyce Adan, and I currently serve as Assistant Vice President at Mercer Marsh Benefits, an entity under Marsh McLennan that is a global leader in risk consulting and insurance brokerage. So, in my role, I work with organizations, particularly new and growing businesses, to address their talent and employee benefit challenges. And a key focus of my work is supporting companies in building mental health programs, especially now that we have this mental health law or the Republic Act 11036 in the Philippines, which aims to guide workplace mental health initiatives in the country. And so, while many of my esteemed co presenters come from the academe, my professional roots are in the corporate sector. Alongside my corporate job, I'm also pursuing my PhD in psychology at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines as part of my long term goal to transition into clinical practice and part time teaching, all while remaining open to consulting collaborations in organizational settings. Now, my work location or where Marsh McLennan Philippines office is, it's in Bonifacio Global City or BGC in Taguig in Metro Manila. So it's a mixed use estate in the country's central business district and home to many multinational corporations. I just want to say that it is indeed an honor to be here among fellow scholars and practitioners sharing in the collective mission of advancing research across all sectors. And it is my pleasure to share with you the exploratory study I conducted entitled Exploring Somatic Therapy in the Philippine Context Practices, Perceptions, and Potentials. So, in the recent decades, somatic therapy has gained global recognition as an effective and promising approach in addressing trauma, chronic stress, and emotional dysregulation. That is according to Kufu et al. In 2021. Unlike the traditional talk therapies that rely heavily on cognitive processing and verbal expression, somatic therapy begins with the body, from the ancient Greek word soma, that means of the body. So, somatic therapy draws one's awareness to bodily sensations, movement, and nervous system patterns to facilitate healing. As Peter Levine emphasized, trauma is not just a story of the past stored in the mind, it is something that lives in the body. And despite its established success internationally, somatic therapy remains largely unfamiliar and still in its infancy in the Philippines. Our mental health landscape continues to be shaped by Western paradigms such as the cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT and other more traditional approaches. While these are valuable, they sometimes fall short in addressing trauma within a collectivist and emotionally restrained culture like ours, where stigma, limited access, and spiritual interpretations of distress often hinder help seeking. So, recognizing this gap, my study explores how somatic therapy is being practiced, perceived, and adapted by Filipino practitioners. Specifically, it aims to understand lived experiences and approaches of the clinical experts already applying somatic techniques within their practice. And number two, to investigate the challenges that practitioners face and the opportunities they see for somatic therapy to thrive in the future. And before we dive deeper, let's take a moment to look at where somatic therapy came from and how it developed. So, the roots of somatic therapy lie at the intersection of psychodynamic theory, body psychotherapy, somatic psychology, trauma studies, and Eastern philosophies, all of which are upholding the value that the mind and body are inseparable. Some of its pioneers include William Reich, who introduced the concept of character armor. Then you have Alexander Lowen, who developed bioenergetic analysis, and John Pierakos, who created core energetics. At the neurobiological level, Porges' polyvagal theory provides a framework for understanding how the nervous system regulates safety, connection, and emotional balance. So, this theory emphasizes how our autonomic nervous system, especially the vagus nerve, plays a central role in trauma and regulation. The polyvagal theory explains all key mechanisms that somatic therapy seeks to restore. And at present, the common types of somatic therapy include somatic experiencing, or SE, accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, or AEDP. Then you have sensory motor psychotherapy, SP for short, and then eye movement desensitization reprocessing, or EMDR, Gestalt psychotherapy, and Hakomi method, among others. And these modalities share certain core principles, yet they differ in their specific focus and techniques. So, for example, SE, it primarily centers on regulating the nervous system and releasing stored survival energy, while AEDP emphasizes healing attachment wounds and exploring deep emotional states. SP, meanwhile, often involves recalling body based memories to promote integration, whereas SE does not necessarily require detailed recollection of traumatic events. And then you have Gestalt therapy and the Hagomi method, which both employ experiential, relational, and mindfulness based approaches that cultivate present moment awareness and self integration. Meanwhile, EMDR resonates with the goal of integration but achieves it through a distinct process called bilateral stimulation to facilitate the reprocessing of traumatic memories. And across these modalities, we find shared techniques such as grounding, body scanning, resourcing, therapeutic touch, and expressive arts. And some approaches, although use some of the approaches actually use terms that they borrowed from other disciplines like chemistry and the hard sciences. So, for example, titration. So this refers to the careful, gradual exploration of traumatic experiences, approaching them in small, manageable doses. And another is pendulation, which is much like a pendulum's movement, right? So it involves shifting attention back and forth between discomfort and a resource. So something that feels safe, supportive, and grounding. And all of these techniques are designed to help clients to reconnect with their bodies, release stored tension, and rebuild resilience from within. For this research, I did use a qualitative design, specifically in-depth semi-structured interviews. I did interview two practitioners who actively use somatic modalities in their clinical work. The first one was a psychiatrist certified in somatic experiencing with over 15 years of experience integrating body based methods into trauma treatment. And then another person I interviewed was a licensed psychologist and EMDR practitioner, specializing in trauma and somatic therapy with over 10 years of experience. And these interviews were conducted online separately, so using both English and Filipino or Tagalog, and recorded with full consent. And both experts shared valuable insights, stories of their practice, their clients' responses, and their, of course, reflections on the cultural realities of doing somatic therapy in the Philippines. So to analyze the qualitative data collected, I employed thematic analysis through which I identified and organized the key themes that emerged from the interviewees' narratives. One of the most profound findings was the reframing of healing itself. Both practitioners describe the body as the entry point to recovery. So in traditional psychotherapy, healing often begins with storytelling or cognitive understanding, what we call a top-down approach. But in somatic therapy, healing starts from the body upward. So this bottom-up process involves helping clients regulate their nervous systems before diving into their trauma narratives. They also highlighted the role of interoception, the capacity to sense internal bodily states such as tension, warmth, heartbeat, or breath. Interoception, they said, is a key pathway to trauma integration. When clients begin to feel what is happening inside, they start reclaiming parts of themselves that trauma had numbed or silenced. Next is another powerful theme was the intersection between somatic therapy and Filipino culture. So they did acknowledge that, they did notice that somatic therapy both challenges and resonates with our cultural norms. And many Filipinos interpret emotional distress through a spiritual lens, seeing it as a form of kulam, sumpa, or spiritual imbalance. So values like hiya, or what we call shame, modesty, and pakikiramdam, which means deep sensitivity to others, often discourage direct emotional expression. Because of this, talk therapy, which relies heavily on verbal processing, can feel foreign or uncomfortable. So, somatic therapy can offer something profoundly fitting for us, and it provides a way to heal beyond words, to express and release through the body. It aligns with our nonverbal, relational, and embodied ways of being. So, the same ways we show care, empathy, and connection in Filipino culture. Both practitioners also observed a recurring pattern among Filipino clients, which is dissociation. This appeared as emotional numbness, chronic fatigue, or even overfunctioning in survival mode. Many of these symptoms trace back to developmental trauma or complex PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are the traumas that occurred in early formative years. Somatic methods proved especially helpful in addressing these, and by using grounding, movement, and sensory awareness, clients learn to come back to their bodies to reconnect with sensations that once felt unsafe. And through this reconnection, many began to rediscover a sense of safety, vitality, and self trust. However, there are significant barriers to the growth of somatic therapy in the Philippines. Currently, no formal local training programs exist. So most practitioners have to pursue certification abroad or through costly online courses. And this limits access, not only for clinicians who wish to learn, but also for clients who could benefit from it. As a result, public awareness of somatic therapy remains low, and its integration into mainstream mental health care is still minimal. A particularly striking insight from the study was the importance of therapist embodiment. Both experts emphasized that in somatic work, the therapist's state of regulation profoundly affects the client's ability to heal. So, in other words, the therapist's body becomes part of the healing space. Their calmness, breath, and groundedness can help co regulate the client's nervous system. As one practitioner aptly said, you cannot guide someone into safety if you are not safe in your own body. So, unlike in other therapeutic approaches where practitioners may compartmentalize and proceed despite the personal stress, somatic therapy requires a different level of presence and regulation. Clients can often sense a therapist's unsettled or dysregulated nervous system. So, if the therapist is not grounded or well, it may not be appropriate to proceed with the session. They also share their personal rituals for resetting between sessions. So, some simple grounding practices, mindful breathing, and gentle stretching to restore presence before meeting with the next client. They both agreed that the therapist's self regulation is not optional, it is an ethical necessity. The transformative power of somatic work came alive also through the case stories that they've shared. So that's one of the key themes that was identified as well. So one therapist described a client whose chronic jaw pain, so linked to suppressed anger, finally eased after several somatic experiencing sessions. And another told of a child who became mute after witnessing his mother's murder. Through months of gentle somatic work, this child gradually began to speak, reconnecting with caregivers and peers. And there was another case of a client whose persistent knee pain disappeared after just one somatic session when the underlying trauma was released. And another, a suicidal patient, so the one who had plateaued, the one who had reported that she had plateaued in talk therapy. So she finally began showing consistent improvement through somatic interventions. And these stories illustrate what words alone cannot, that trauma lives in the body and healing too must pass through it. In conclusion, the study reinforces the idea that trauma is not just psychological, but it's also a physiological issue. And somatic therapies like SE and EMDR can treat core disturbances in the body, making them powerful complements to traditional psychotherapy. Despite the cultural and structural hurdles, Somatic therapy holds enormous promise for the Philippines. It bridges science, culture, and spirituality, offering a more holistic way to understand and treat distress. So it redefines healing not just as symptom reduction, but as a restoration of connection. So between mind, body, and spirit. To move this work forward, I propose three key steps. So first, to establish local and regional training programs and implement with pilot groups as seen fit so that practitioners can learn and apply somatic methods without the prohibitive costs. And then second would be conducting public education and discussion on removing stigma of body-based interventions. So normalizing body-based approaches and dismantling stigma around trauma and emotional expressions. And third would be to expand research. So promoting further research on culturally specific adaptations and integrate with indigenous healing tradition. As to the impact of the study, so this study aligns closely with the Republic Act 11036 or the Philippine Mental Health Law, which envisions an integrated, inclusive, and culturally relevant mental health system. And by shedding light on somatic therapy, this research helps lay the groundwork for embodied, holistic mental health care in the country. It bridges global evidence with Filipino lived experience. And on a personal note, this research has really moved me. I chose this topic because I am very passionate about holistic health, personal growth, and helping people heal, not only psychologically but also physiologically. In fact, I am a plant based chef, a fitness advocate, and meditation practitioner, and I do have this belief that healing is multidimensional. And through this study, I learned that the body remembers, but it also knows how to heal, if only we learn to listen. So conducting this research reaffirmed as well my belief that the future of mental health lies in the integration of where evidence-based psychology meets embodied awareness and where healing honors the whole person. So in closing, somatic therapy invites us to listen not only to the stories we tell, but to the stories our bodies hold. It reminds us that healing is not just about talking, it's about feeling, it's about sensing and reclaiming life through the body. So if we can bring this understanding into our communities, workplaces, and policies, we can help Filipinos heal more fully. So that's mind, body, and soul. With that, that ends my presentation, and I really appreciate your time and attention today. For my references, I have shared them here as well. Thank you and have a good afternoon.